Hi readers, Chris here. Welcome to my channel where I review fantasy, Stephen King, all sorts of books, and today I'm going to be talking about my May wrap-up and my June TBR. May was an interesting month. It was a bit of a roller coaster. Started out not so good, got really good, and then ended not so good. As many of you probably already know already, there is a member of our booktube community who is no longer with us. I've been trying to think of a way to honor Pax's memory, and I have a couple ideas, so something I might work on this weekend or in the next few weeks. But for today, I am just gonna, keep moving on and jump into my May wrap-up. As per usual, I'm going to rank all of my books by order of favorite, and this month that was really hard because there weren't a whole lot of standouts this month. Most of the books had things I really liked about them and then things that I didn't quite gel with. So whenever you have a bunch of books like that, it's hard to rank them, but I do the best I can. So here we go with my 7th favorite book of the month. The Regulators by Richard Bachman, a.k.a. Stephen King. So this is a companion novel to Stephen King's other work, Desperation. So I read Desperation in April, and then I read this one in May. And if you remember, I had some issues with Desperation, and guess what? I had the same issues with The Regulators. I thought this book started out super strong, like it's got a really creepy and terrifying, opening through the beginning of the book. But then I feel like the book just kind of totally goes off the rails. In this one in particular, I felt like there were two different storylines, but they were competing with each other, which was really weird. So yeah, just like Desperation, the second half of this book lost me and overall left me feeling a bit disappointed. I went back and forth on number 6 and number 5, but in number 6 I have For the Wolf by Hannah Whitten. This is another book that disappointed me a little bit because I just wanted more out of it. So this is a Little Red Riding Hood retelling, and this one, Red is what a second daughter, and second daughters have this long tradition of being like sacrificed to the wolf in the woods so that, the kingdom is protected, blah, blah, blah. If you have read Shadow and Bone, and you are familiar with the character of Alina Starkov, Little Red Riding Hood very much reminds me of Alina in the Shadow and Bone books. And what I mean by that is that there's not much to her. She is kind of a blank slate, just like Alina is. Now, I will say, in defense of this book, that there are a bunch of characters around Red that I find way more interesting. So Red has a sister that she left behind named Neve. She was a way more interesting character than Red was. So it's unfortunate that the main storyline is told through Red's point of view. Maybe that'll change in the future. I don't know. I would pick up the second book, but only if the second book is about the other sister and not about Red. My 5th favorite book of the month is Quest. This is the 4th book in the Septimus Heap series by Angie Sage. And I have to say, I really went into this book expecting not to like it. I went into this book thinking, okay, this is going to be the last book I read in the series because I'm not going to like it, it's not going to be good, and I'm going to give up on the series. However, I found myself halfway through the book going, you know what, I'm actually enjoying this one. It does have a bit of a slow start, and that's why through the first half of the book I was kind of like, here we go, another one. But I found the back half of this book really enjoyable. It's a middle grade fantasy, it's an adventure tale. I liked it way more than I thought I would, so that's why I ended up bumping this up to number 5. I still have some issues with it overall, but it's a cute book, and I think because I liked this one more than I thought I did, I'm probably going to have to keep reading the series. My fourth favorite book of the month is going to be Polar City Blues by Katharine Kerr. This is a sci-fi book, and I don't know if you consider this indie sci-fi. It kind of looks like an indie book, to be honest. Seajar, if you are watching, let me know. So Seajar was the one who recommended this book to me. Over on Bookstagram, I had asked for some recommendations. This was the one she recommended to me. And when I first started this book, I did struggle with it a lot. I struggled with it a lot because the dialect really threw me off. And I wish that there was more about the author. There's not an author page in this book at all. So I really want to find out where this author is from and what her background is. However, there is a note that I don't think I noticed at first, honestly. But there's a note in the book that basically explains that the dialect in the book is a combination of like Standard English, Black English, and New World Spanish. So because those three things mix together, I had a bit of a hard time like getting into it, if that makes sense. However, eventually I did. Eventually I got used to it. And once I did, I found this a really enjoyable story. It's basically like a sci-fi murder mystery. I mean, there's more to it than that. There's aliens, there's psychics, there's even romance. I didn't really find much humor in it per se. I would say that maybe there's like some silly stuff, but not like ha 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 funny. So overall, I ended up liking this one at the end of the day. I probably don't like it as much as some of my top three here, but it's still an enjoyable story. And I think if you're a fan of science fiction, you should definitely check this one out. All right, number 3. I went back and forth on this one and Polar City Blues, but I ended up putting this in number 3, and that is The Ones We're Meant to Find. This is also a sci-fi book, but this is more of a YA sci-fi, where Polar City Blues is much more adult. This one I ended up putting in number 3 because this one has way more twists and turns in it. So in this story, we have 2 girls, 2 sisters. One is on an island, like abandoned island, all alone, trying to get back to her sister. The other sister is in what they call an eco city. She thinks her sister's dead, but she doesn't really know what happened to her. So she's over here trying to find out what happened to the sister. This one's over here. It sounds like a simple story, and on the surface it is. However, as the book goes along, it gets really complex, and there are some crazy twists and turns in this book. Like, crazy twists and turns. Yeah, I would love to talk to someone who's read this one and find out what people think of the twists, because some of the twists I thought were really fun, but there's like 1 or 2 in here that I'm like, that's just weird. It's just weird. So because this book is just weird at times, that's why it's not higher. However, overall, I do think that it's a fun story. All right, top 2. I also went back and forth on these 2, but my second favorite book of the month is going to be Heir of Fire by Sarah J. Maas. This series continues to impress me and surprise me because, like I said, I did not like Sarah J. Maas's other books, so I don't know why I love this series so much, but I'm really enjoying it. I'm really enjoying it. I love it. I love a good YA fantasy, and this is the epitome of YA fantasy. It's got all the fantasy tropes. It's got tons of characters, crazy world building, like wow, 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 wow. And this one in particular, just like the first 2 books in the series, is just super fun. It's just super fun. It brings me joy, and it's the type of book that I just want to keep reading late until the night because I'm just totally enmeshed in this fantasy world, and I can't help it. I can't help it. I really like this series, and I don't foresee that changing anytime soon. So that brings me to my number 1 favorite book of May, which is going to be Babel by R.F. Kuang. I think it's safe to say, after having read The Poppy Wars and now this, that I love R.F. Kuang's writing. I love her writing, because here is the thing about my experience with this book. I'm definitely going to have to do like a super in-depth review, but all I will say for right now is that this book was an emotional and mental roller coaster. I loved the beginning of this book. I loved when all the kids are in the Tower of Babel, the school, they're learning about how to do different translations and how translation works and the power that I loved all that. I took multiple linguistics classes when I went to college, so I am very familiar with the way that language works. So all of that stuff, word etymology, I find all of that fascinating. Once we got into like the crux of the story, the why of the story, the why things were happening and where they were going, I started to struggle with it. I started to not like where it was going, and I started to not like the choices that some characters were making. However, again, as the book went on and we got to the very, very end, I was like, wow, there's nothing else that could have happened except what happened in this book. And the final line in this book had me Googling on my phone into the late hours of the night, looking up actual real-world history about various countries. This book is incredible. It has so many layers. It has layers on layers. Its layers have layers. Like, there's a lot going on in here. If you've read the Poppy Wars, you will know R.F. Kuang writes morally gray characters. Her characters in here are morally gray. They're not likable all the time. They don't make the right choices all the time. But for me, I find that fascinating. I get tired of reading the same old chosen one stories, the same old goody two-shoe characters. So if there's a character who I am struggling with the choices that they make, I actually find that really fascinating and really interesting. So yes, I'm gushing. I loved Babel. At times I didn't, but ultimately I love it. It's a really special book, and I can't wait to talk more about it in depth. All right, that is everything for May. So now I'm going to move on to June, and my June TBR is slightly different than normal. If you've been here for a while, you'll know I usually have like certain categories that I pick books for every month. I am still doing that. However, I'm modifying some of the categories, and you'll see why in a minute. So let's start with number one, my recommendation for June. I recently got a bunch of indie books from indie authors, and I really, really, really want to read them. I have too many to tackle all at once, but I decided I am going to pick 3 for June. That's right, 3. Because a lot of them are actually smaller, so I feel like if I keep my books to like, smaller page counts and stop reading so many chunkers, I can fit more books in here. At least that's what I'm telling myself. So the first book that I have picked out for June is going to be Immortalized in Ink by N.P Hunt. I don't think N.P is on BookTube. I know he's on Bookstagram, but if you're watching N.P, my plan is to read 1 or 2 poems a day throughout the month of June. If that takes me into July, that's fine. I think 1 poem a day is great, a great way to get through this one, and a great way to support an indie author. My second indie pick for June is going to be The Lakeside Cemetery by Jessica Haas, who I know has a YouTube channel. I'm so sorry, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but I will, I'll post a picture of it over here when I am editing. I had won a copy of this book from David over at David's Book Reviews, and I have been wanting to read it, so I thought, I'm not waiting anymore. I'm going to read a bunch of indie books this month, and this is going to be one of them. Next up, I am still continuing my Stephen King journey, so 1 Stephen King book a month until I've read his entire bibliography. So now I am up to Wizarding Glass. I'm so happy that I can finally get back to the Dark Tower series. This is book 4 in the Dark Tower series. There's a pretty big time between book 3 and book 4, so I'm glad that there is like a recap in the beginning of this one. I'm reading his books by publication date, and the 3rd Dark Tower book was published a long time ago compared to when Wizarding Glass came out, so it's kind of making me regret going by publication date, but I think I'll be okay. Next up, I don't have an adult fantasy this month. However, I do have an adult sci-fi book, and that's going to be Fractal Noise by Christopher Paolini. This is his latest and greatest book. It just came out like a week ago, I think, or 2 weeks ago. This is supposed to take place in the same universe as his previous book, To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. I absolutely loved that book. Loved it, loved it, loved it. So I'm hoping that I will love this one just as much. Next up, I have 2 random choices. Not 1, but 2, because again, one of these books is super small, and that's going to be my 3rd and final indie book, Half Human Heroes. This is a fantasy anthology, and all of the stories in here were made by fellow authors here on BookTube. Starting with Jeremy Fee, who put this together and edited it. Mason in the Dark has a story in here. There's a bunch of other people, maybe ones that I don't know personally, but let me just say that, first of all, look at this cover. It's beautiful. I think it's so cool that there's a fantasy anthology, and I cannot wait to dive into this one. The other random book I wanted to put in this category is One Last Stop by Casey McQuinston. You may recognize her name. She wrote Red, White, and Royal Blue, which is an LGBTQ romance. So is this one. I thought, hey, it's Pride Month. This would be a great time to read this type of a romance. I've heard from some people that it's not quite as good as Red, White, and Royal Blue, but I've also heard people tell me that this one's great. So I'm going to read it and see what I think. So now for the back half of my list, instead of doing YA fantasy, middle grade fantasy, and an Owl Crate book, I'm doing 3 YA fantasies, starting with another LGBTQ romance, which is going to be The Red Scrolls of Magic, Cassandra Clare. This book is about one of my all-time favorite couples in all of literature, Magnus Bane and Alec Lightwood. I have been wanting to read this series so bad. I wanted to kind of finish reading like the main series before I did this kind of like side story. So I'm so glad this is the perfect time to read it, perfect time to jump in. I just hope that spending time with these characters again gives me everything that I think that it will. My next YA fantasy on the list is Divine Arrivals by Rebecca Ross. First of all, if you saw my most recent Owl Crate book box, this book is just freaking gorgeous and I need to read it. I've also been seeing this book all over Bookstagram, and I've been hearing good things. I like the other book I read by her, so I have very high hopes for this one. And honestly, I've only read 3 chapters so far, but so far it's starting off pretty good. And then finally, I'm squeezing one more in here, and that's going to be The Luminaries by Susan Dennard. I have way more Owl Crate books than I can ever possibly read, so if I don't start reading like 2 a month, I'm never going to catch up. This one is under 300 pages, so I'm hoping that I'll be able to get through this one this month with all the other ones that I have going on. So altogether, that is 9 books for June. 9. I typically read 7, so it's 2 more than normal, but hopefully, like you've seen, a lot of these are smaller in size than what I normally read, because I read a lot of chunky books, so I think I'll be able to get through it, but wish me luck. Alright everyone, that's it for me today. Jack says it's time for a nap. But before you go, let me know, what was your favorite book in May? What are you planning on reading in June? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're not already, please subscribe to my channel for more books and more furry friends coming your way soon. Alright everyone, thanks for watching and happy reading. Can you say bye, Jack? Thank you, baby.